My name is Rüdiger Gartmann and I'm the product owner for Security Manager. After in the first video you've already seen what you can achieve with Security Manager, in this current video I would like to show you how you can do that. So let's have a look at how to manage policies inside of Security Manager. So as you know, with Security Manager you can create different access permissions for different users. So in these four examples, it's always the same service and the same viewer. We have just different user logins and you see the effect. So different users get different content. So let's have a look at the Security Manager administration. So first we see the Service Manager, and the Service Manager defines how Security Manager actually acts for the different services. And the Policy Explorer shows you which actual policies are in place. So let's select a service. This is the service we have just seen. And here you can either edit permissions, activate or deactivate Security Manager, or view the service status information. So you can see all relevant information about the actual service. Now let's switch over to the Policy Explorer. You can also pick the service we have seen before and have a look at the different layers and the groups which are authorized for these layers. So for the power plants layers, we have 4 groups which are authorized, and we also have an indication whether there is a restriction in place or not. So here we had a spatial restriction, and there are other restrictions as well. And this is the same for all layers. But we can also turn the view around and start with the groups. So for instance, let's have a look into the California group. And here we can see which layers are authorized for this group on this actual service. And again, we see the restrictions. So here we have a spatial restriction on the area of California. It's the same for both layers. Let's have a look into another group, like the imaginary group. This is for users of Imaginary Power, a company which runs power plants and transmission lines. And here we can filter on feature level, so we only show features where the operator is Imaginary Power, or transmission lines where the owner is Imaginary Power. And finally, let's have a look at the maintenance group. And the users of that group only have access to a transmission lines layer, and they have 3 restrictions in place. A spatial restriction, a feature restriction that filters only to high voltage power lines, and a field restriction that filters out 3 fields out of the layer. So let's get back to the Service Manager and have a look into the policy. This is how policies are defined. And in there we have a policies block, we have a restrictions block, and a properties block. So let's have a look into the policies first. What we see here are the different policies for the different user groups. So this, for instance, is the policy for the maintenance group, which gives access to layer number 2, which is assigned to the maintenance group, and which has 3 restrictions in place. And the restrictions in there are just references to the restrictions defined in the restrictions block. Here we have the field restriction, we have the feature restriction filtering on high voltage power lines only, and we have the spatial restriction in here. And these restrictions are then automatically enforced for the policy above. And finally, we also have properties, and because we have to work with group IDs instead of group names, we just assign the group IDs to a property which has the same name as the group. Therefore, we can use California inside of the roles instead of the corresponding group ID. And here comes the cool thing. You don't have to type all this JSON by hand, but the tool provides you templates you have just to fill. So when we start creating a new policy, we just pick the template, put in layer 0, refer to the role. In this case, we have an inspection group in our portal. And we need that symbol in front to make sure it's a reference. And now we already created a policy for the inspection group with access permissions to layer 0. But this is not enough. We would like to add a restriction. And this is also where you can just pick a template, put in a restriction name. And so we just use a restriction we already have defined. And now we add another restriction which says only wind. So we would like to filter the power plants which are displayed in that layer to wind power plants only. And this is a new restriction, so I can show you how you can create additional restrictions. So you put in the name. And again, you can pick a template for the corresponding type of restriction. In this case, we need a feature restriction. And we just put in a query. So we filter on features where the field primary FU includes W and D as a value. Let's save the policy. And then switch over to the Policy Explorer to verify what we have just done. We are filtering for the inspection group, a group that does inspections on wind power plants. And here we see both restrictions are in place. So the policy is done. Let's get back to the service and have a look into the status information. And here we already have a link to the service itself. Now we can open it in an incognito window browser because we want to log in with a different identity than the administrator. This is a user from the inspection group. And first of all, we only see one layer instead of 3 layers which are provided by that service. And we can just open that in the ArcGIS Online viewer and see the effect of the policy we have just created. So you see content is limited to California only. You see a couple of power plants in there. And when we look into the features themselves and search for the primary FU attribute, then you see all values are W and D. So these are all wind power parks in California. And this is how that policy actually works. So thank you for watching. Make sure you have a look into the other videos too. Thank you and bye-bye.